Shout, shout, up with your song. Cry with the wind, for the dawn is breaking. March, march, swing you along. Wide blows our banner and hope is waking. Song with its story, dreams with their glory. Lo, they call, and glad is their word.
The Bennington branch of AAUW planned to spend 2020 celebrating the Women's Suffrage Centennial. We had a lecture about Susan B. Anthony, a film festival, and a performance of the music of the suffrage period. We were queuing up a performance by Sojourner Truth when COVID-19 stopped everything. Like the suffragists of 1918 dealing with the Spanish flu, we couldn't let something like a pandemic stop us. So we did a pandemic pivot to virtual programming and looked for ways to continue our celebration and our education. This program grew out of that desire. Here we take a look at the revolution in women's fashion that accompanied women's struggle for the vote. And we do that by asking some remarkable suffragists from Vermont and New England to help us tell the story. I'm Kathy Wagenish, president of the Bennington branch of AAUW, and this is From Corset to Combination, the fashion revolution of women's suffrage.
Hail, hail, victors you stand, wearing the wreath that the brave have worn.
My name is Linda Meyer, and I'm the owner of Linda's Antique Clothing Loft in Adams, Massachusetts. And I'm also a fashion historian. And we are in the most beautiful building one could desire to be in to do this lecture. And that's the Park McCullough House in North Bennington, Vermont. And this is a lecture about the dynamics of women's fashion from 1900 to 1925. It was the most revolutionary change in fashion for maybe 2,000 years. The impact of the women's movement by the turn of the century had a lot to do with the revolution in fashion, but also the turn of the 20th century was enormously impacted by the amount of technology that was being developed, telephones, cars, movies. And at the same time, within 15 years, there was the most horrific World War I. By the time these 1900 began in 1925, the social, technological, and economic revolutions had been an enormous force worldwide, especially in the United States and in England, which were the foremost countries at the time. And what I'm going to show you is how fashion was so impacted that to understand the revolutionary aspect of it is to see the beginning of 1900 and what happened by 1925. We're going to start with the early 1900s, and this is a corset, and it's a magnificent instrument of shaping, and it was made of the same materials sails were made. It's very, very strong. The engineering that has gone into this garment is breathtaking. It is a structure that was built on bones. Bones mean stays. And these bones are stainless steel. At one time they were whale bones, but by 1900 they were mostly steel. And the corset is faceted by very strong hooks and eyes. Where the heart of the corset is in the back, it's in the stringing. And this stringing compressed the body as much as you could take compression. And actually, Corsets were started on young girls by the time they were 8. By the time they were 12, they were really into wearing adult corsets. And so your body was trained to be strained in that way. Corsets, if someone had a waistline of 22 inches, they could be corseted down to 18. One didn't eat in public because of that, but it was a part of dress that throughout the 19th century, corsets were a basic part of getting dressed. So the first thing that a lady of the late 19th, early 20th century would have on her body is a corset. She would be strung into it. She wouldn't be strung into it every time. The stringing would be set, and so she could be taken off with hooks and eyes. The second garment that was put on a lady were bloomers, well actually drawstring pants. And they were actually open-seamed because when one is wearing so many garments, the practicality of using the toilet is taken into how things are constructed. And so you do not have to pull anything down, you could just pull things up to use the bathroom. And the open crotch bloomers were worn also from mid to late 19th century. Before that, nothing was worn. There were some pantalettes, but underwear was considered tasteless until the French started, in the mid-19th century, started appreciating how much bloomers can affect your modesty. In case you were thrown down, your legs would never be just bare, they would be covered, and which is a very important part of modesty thrust of the 19th century. Your legs are never revealed. I'm going to show you, this is how this would be worn. The bloomers, so you have a corset, and you have bloomers, and the next item, that would be a petticoat. In actuality, there would be several petticoats, but they would all be about the same as this one. They would most likely be drawstringed. And that's partly because you could adjust it to any size waist. And many of these items were homemade, and they were passed down. Women would collect these pieces for their trousseaux and be handed down from one generation to another. And they would also be wearing petticoats in different phases of their life, as i.e. pregnancy. And corsets were worn during pregnancy. When you could no longer put a corset on, you had to stay home. All these pieces, although no one would ever see them, they were just beautifully made. This is all very fine batiste cotton and just beautifully embroidered with rows of flounces. And this was worn under the clothing. This is a corset cover. It was meant to cover the corset so that it could never be revealed. There was a great deal of covering up. And it was a little bit like those Russian dolls, where one piece was to cover the piece that went under. And this is also drawstring, and it has little tiny shell buttons. They're very tiny. You can see what a good job the corset did just from looking at how the clothes look on this form, and how all the pieces are conforming to the dimensions that you're supposed to be using. After the corset cover, bloomers, petticoats. Came the dress. Now this dress is from about 1905. It's called a pigeon-breasted dress. It has a bodice that overlaps the front to the waist. It is also boned. So not only are you wearing a corset that's very tightly boned, the dress itself is boned as well. So all this is to work into a specific silhouette. And by 1905, the silhouette was called an S-curve. And you'll see why. We'll put the dress on. This is foam color, which was very, very popular at the turn of the century. White clothes and pastel clothes and light coloring was fashion. Color is fashion. And this dress is pure silk. It has 2 layers. It has a whole underlayer. The lace that is inserted in between all the fine pleating and tucks in Israel that was handmade lace. Dress is hooked and eyed. This is way before zippers, which were a device that was worked on for 40 years. The zipper was such an important invention during the early part of the 20th and late part of the 19th century. It really was lusted after because everything had to either be snapped or hooked and eyed. And it really limited the fact of a woman being able to live alone. You had to have someone to help you dress, whether it was your mother or your sister or your husband. There was no way, there was no way that one could really dress oneself. And this is the end product. It would take about 40 minutes of work to put this outfit together. I kind of eliminated some of the time by stretching the corset. That would have taken at least 10 to 15 minutes of work to have the corset aimed. And each time you take it off, you don't take off the strings, but you do have to adjust the strings. It's like winching on a boat. You have to winch it back into the dynamics that you want. So this is along with this hat. And this hat is wonderful. It's also very constructed. It has wire inside, and it's meant to sit on top of your do. And so this is the 1900s lady. But within one generation, we went from this to, this is the underpinnings of 1925, a combination it's called. This is it. It's called a combination, and it's a combination of, has little under attachment, and it has a camisole, and they're sewn together in one piece. And this is what we just went through. About, in real life, would be about 25, 40 minutes of constructing the underpinnings that went under this outfit and to this. And this would be worn under this dress. This dress is from 1924. It was one piece. It was tucked, pleated all the way to the hip. And then It was a lace insert skirt. The material is silk crepe, and it has a front piece that's very asymmetrical, which is a very important part of the look of the 20s, of the Art Deco movement at the end of World War I. It came out of France. And everything was designed to be very simple lines, and sometimes asymmetrical. There was a lot of geometric impulses in the designing. The impact on the movement of liberating women was just enormous. And also, I have to say, it was the first time in 2,000 years that women were in public with their legs showing. The leg fetish was just enormous. There was never ever to be in polite society any reference to the fact that women had a wedge between their legs. That's where one gave birth to children, so you were intimating that your mother was not the saintly person that she was promoted to be. It was a complete mindset, and it was absolutely broken down in one generation. The impact of World War I, of the women's movement, changed clothes for women so radically that it never went back. There was never enforced confinement of corsets and layers of petticoats. Later on, in the future, there were torpedo bras and girdles, but they were never as confining as enforced as they were before the 1920s. And this is a matching hat to this outfit, and see, it's just the simplicity of line was more than just an aesthetic. It was really a mentality of liberation.
Comrades, ye who have dared first in the battle to strive and sorrow, scorned, spurned, naught ye have cared, raising your eyes to a wider morrow.
This is our first women's rights person that we're introducing, is Inez Mulholland. Inez originally was from Brooklyn, and she was from a well-to-do family that sent her abroad to be educated. But after a while, she wanted to come back to the United States, and she came back to Vassar, where she was an undergraduate, and she led the first women's rights movement there. Of course, she had to do it in a cemetery close by the school because they would not give her permission to do it. She was a graduate of NYU Law School. She was very active in women's rights and abolitionist and labor movement. And she was, and she led the parade on a white charger. She was a knight exemplar. And she was a magnificent woman. She died very young. She was only 30 years old. And her widower married Edna St. Vincent Millay, who wrote a memorial to her that is in Lewis, New York. She is wearing a beautiful cape, hand embroidered, silk with fringe. She's wearing a tunic of silk with wonderful embroidery and antique lace, and she is wearing a petticoat with foam green with a silk fringe, and she's wearing riding boots. Thank you, Inez. Our next advocate for women's rights was Asha Sprague. And Asha was active in the 1850s and early 60s. She also died young. She was only 34. She died in 1862. And she was an advocate for women's rights, an abolitionist, and a poet. And she was kind of and she was also a medium. She brought spirits back to their loved ones. And she was part of the kind of counterculture of the 19th century Vermont. And her sister wrote a book about her work called 7 Years Grace. And Grace is a real good description of who Asha was. This shirt is from about 1862, and if you notice, it's in wonderful, wonderful condition. The type of cotton that it was made from was meant to be very strong. There were layers that is all pleated. This skirt was made by machine. It was one of the early machines that were so popular in the 1860s. It encompassed her hoop skirt beautifully. It was designed to encompass a huge skirt on the bottom, and it was the beginning of the change in women's clothing. In the mid-19th century, manufacturing afforded cheap garments for masses of people. Our next women's rights and abolitionary rights is, here she is now, Clarina Nichols. And Clarina was a native of Vermont. Oops. She came from Townsend, Vermont. She was a journalist, and she worked in Brattleboro for the Windsor Democrat. She married the editor, who died, and she took over his position. She was the first one to present to the Vermont Assembly a petition for women to vote for school leaders. Of course, it was denied. But in 1854, she left to go to Kansas, and that was to protest against the act of advancing slavery in the United States. And she was also a very good friend of Susan B. Anthony. She worked on the Underground Railroad, and at the same time she availed herself to house women who were coming through places like Kansas to speak for women's rights. She is wearing a magnificent capelet that is hand embroidered with fringes. It's from the 1880s, lined in silk with a long silk ribbon from neck to hips in the back. She was wearing a chintz skirt with a ruffle on the bottom. She was wearing a bustle, and no respectable woman would be seen without her proper undergarments, no matter how radical a feminist she might have been at the time. Thank you. And our last lady is another Vermont native from Grafton, Vermont. And this is Lucy Daniels. And Lucy was a woman of means, as you can see from this beautiful suit that she had made for her. And she also was a lawyer. She also was a graduate of NYU Law School. NYU was one of the first schools to admit women into their law schools. And she refused to pay taxes. No taxation without representation, she said. The town retaliated by trying to tax everything she owned. So she and her sister went to live in London for a while, but she returned to Grafton, where she was very involved in organizing the 1913 March on Washington for Women's Rights. And she demanded that African American women be included in this march, and she fought for that. And it turned a lot of the women in the women's movement into recognizing the importance of black women, black suffragettes in their movement. She died in 1949. The suit that she is wearing is magnificent, really. It's a walking suit. It's something that she would have worn to the march because it is meant for that. The skirt is gored. It is made of very, very fine linen. The top has very mutton chop sleeves. It also has an inserted vest. It also has magnificent buttons. Every aspect of clothes in from the late 19th, early 20th century was attended to. And her buttons are mother of pearl and they're hand painted. Her hat is wonderful. It is lace, feather, and velvet. It has a wire construction so that it sits on top, and it's to accentuate a lovely face. Thank you. Jennifer and I are the future of the women's movement. We're both garbed in 1920s dresses that have no structure, which is their charm. They're both made of batiste cotton. Jennifer is wearing a blue glass necklace, and that's about the length of the jewelry that was worn during that time to emphasize the line of the dress. I am wearing also a batiste cotton dress that is finely embroidered. The 1920s had a totally different line, but their aesthetics and the value of their work in their clothes was the same as the late 19th century. Our banner that Jennifer and I are holding is the authentic colors of the women's movement and would be the colors of the banners that were worn during the parades. I was told that in England, the bottom yellow color would have been green, but this is a reproduction of the type of banner that was carried during the very famous 1913 parade down Washington, D.C.
Shout, shout, up with your song, cry with the wind, for the dawn is breaking. March, march, swing you along, wide blows our banner and hope is waking. Song with its story, dreams with their glory, lo they call, and glad is their word. Loud and louder it swells, thunder of freedom, the voices unheard. Comrades, ye who have dared, first in the battle to strive and sorrow, scorned, spurned, naught ye have cared, raising your eyes to a wider morrow. Ways that are weary, days that are dreary, toil and pain, by faith ye have borne. Hail, hail, victors you stand, wearing the wreath that the brave have worn. Life, strife, those two are one, naught can ye win but by faith and daring. On, that ye have done, but for the work of today preparing. Firm in reliance, laugh a defiance, laugh in hope, for sure is the end. March, march, many as one, shoulder to shoulder and friend to friend.